Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the Business of Creativity podcast, the unofficial podcast of the Grazia Dio Business School. I'm joined today by second-year full-time MBA student, Ignacio Rodriguez. Greetings, Ignacio. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Ty.
Yeah, I'm happy you're on. We're getting close to our graduation, and who knows where this podcast to go. But what I'm trying to do is, before I leave, interview as many people and tell as many stories as possible for, potentially people who find this podcast as they're looking for an MBA program or any type of business school, graduate school program to attend. And so figure if I interview enough people, maybe the story will be out there a little bit, right? So a little bit about your background. Undergrad at UCLA, right? From down here, Southern California. Studied English, specifically American literature and culture, which is an interesting major. Right after UCLA, you worked for an insurance company, property claims manager. You told me that wasn't the best experience in terms of a job, right? Right. Undergrad, you wanted to make the world a better place, so you went into education. Substitute taught at a charter school, and then they moved you over. They saw some of the skills you had and moved you over like to managing products and kind of operations process role, and they wanted to become a business officer in that charter school kind of management thing. And then came to Pepperdine as an MBA, and off to the journey race they call it an MBA adventure. So I'm happy to have you on, because the background is very interesting. So one thing I did notice, LinkedIn profile, what stood out to me was it looked like right after UCLA, you kind of took a social justice path, right, in terms of the charter school, but also maybe there were a couple other activities you were involved with. In terms of social justice. And I wonder about why was that a path you took coming out, and why was social justice, and as you mentioned, or as I mentioned in your bio, why was kind of making the world a better place important to you?
Sure. Well, actually, even at UCLA, I was a community development social justice scholar. So I received a scholarship for that, where we went out and did research out in the community. And I was actually on a path to get a PhD in public policy. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go out and, like you said, make the world a better place. But I was also coached and into a different path because, first generation college student, there's like 7 of us, first one in my family graduated high school and so forth. First one to be in college and space like that. For me, I thought, maybe there's something that I can do, practical in the world. And I left school and sort of in that undecided phase. So I took the first job that I could get, insurance. But there was something always gnawing at me, right? Felt like, what am I doing? This isn't at the core of my values. This has nothing to do with what I want to do. And I really did not like that job, and so I thought, well, education is a great space for me. I understand how some of these kids grow up. I came from a place where my biggest advocates sometimes were teachers and sometimes they weren't. I thought when I was at UCLA, there were times when I was the only one that sort of looked like me, a person of color. And I thought there's so many smart kids out there. And, in high school, I was like, from most of my friends, I was the only one who graduated high school. I was in a party crew in high school, did all that, right? But I thought, I'm not that special. How can we get more people like us into these schools? So I thought, let's go to education. Let me see if I can make an impact. And that was the genesis of all of that. I thought, going to education, I want to make a difference. How? Not sure, but let's see if I can do something about it.
How long did you spend in that organization, that charter school?
Yeah, so all in all, different roles, about 6 years. Yeah, I started as a sub and then eventually moved into administrative kind of duties. And then eventually I became a full-blown administrator and focused on the operations side.
So you went in wanting to make a difference and you were there for 6 years. When you evaluated under the lens of making a difference, do you feel like you were able to touch some of the children there or affect some of the teachers there? Or do you feel like you made a difference in that 6 years while you were there?
Yeah, I think so. I think, coming out of undergrad, I think I was arrogant, but also naive. I think that, somehow I'm going to go and make a huge difference and change everyone's lives. But I was able to definitely change, I think, in a positive way, the outcomes of some students. Even to this day, I have some who are in college now, right? And they send me emails of them in college.
Like what I'm doing. I gotta add
here's where I'm at, Mr. Rodriguez, right? Because that's how I was known, Mr. Rodriguez. And so things like that. But also just in general, knowing that our organization can do better by looking at it differently, right? Like, what are the other schools doing? And what can we do with the resources that we have, right? Can we reach more kids? How can we extract the most out of our resources that we have here to maximize, the results from these kids, right? These outcomes for children. And so I felt that we were definitely moving in a positive way. I mean, if we were to really dig into some of the data of our organization, we were outperforming all the other schools. Of course, we had a great team behind that, but I think we just, we're really focusing on the outcomes, and our main vision at that school was to get kids into a 4-year university. That's what it was all about.
One more question on that experience. One of the roles you told me offline was that you became kind of an internal consultant. And you just mentioned data, and you just mentioned looking at what we're doing in system and processes and how we can improve these processes to further the outcome we wanted to achieve, which was getting these kids to school. Talk about that experience, because I feel like when you get that kind of experience at that age, that will probably guide you at least for the next 10 or 15 years in terms of why you gather other experiences throughout your career.
Sure. So like I mentioned, I became a full-blown administrator at one point and on the operations side. And so when I was leaving, a couple of days before I was leaving, in fact, I had a meeting with the head person there, the executive director, and she offered me a consulting role, right? So we set up a contract and everything else. And, for the first year of MBA school, I worked as a consultant in the operations side. And specifically, now, if you remember, during 2020, that's when COVID happened. So then learning systems and everything else had to move online. So I helped to kind of move those processes and implement, that new learning environment for students during that whole year. And mostly, at one point, I was actually being used a lot to work with just personnel. And oftentimes when we had to let people go, I was the main person that was called in to
really
take care of that. So
Ignacio, we got to let Dr. Johnson go. Can you go talk to?
So it was kind of interesting. The funny thing is that I think in groups maybe I don't do as well, but in one-on-one, I feel that I'm always in control of the situations. Plus, I think I had a certain presence at the school. I had been there for a while, and maybe my authority had a lot to do with it too.
Oh man, you were the hammer. Give people the pink slip. That's interesting. I don't know if that's the job I really want. You know what I mean? I don't want the last thing you see is me smile and say, we got to go in a different direction.
It's not working out right now.
But you know what? That's actually experience. That's actually good leadership and management experience for you, though. So your MBA journey. So now you did a year working as a consultant for the charter school, and you got to get a summer internship, right? And so now all this experience you can either make decisions now based on experience, or you can make decisions based on the values you have established from those experiences, right? So you get to the summer internship, and now you got to decide, what am I going to do with this future? Do I stick in this education kind of management, kind of consulting type role, or do I want to just pivot and go do something else, right? This is the MBA journey, right? So tell me where you got to coming into the summer internship.
I think I always had an interest in getting to financial services. But of course, undergrad, English, education experience, nothing to do with it. But, most of us come to business school and we want to make a pivot, right? So I said, you know what, let me see if I can get into, this sector, right? And if it doesn't work out, I could always go back into education. So I started doing that. I started doing my research, looking at different companies, and I went to a few webinars. I liked kind of where JP Morgan Chase is standing. I reached out to a bunch of people at the firm. And, one of the main things for me too is I'm really big on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was one of the main things that were driving, at least in those webinars. And the other thing too was that a lot of the panelists kind of reflected, this diversity, right? This initiatives that they were creating. And so again, I was very blessed to connect with the employees there. One particularly really coached me on the interview process, and it just kind of worked out seamlessly, really. I was able to go through the interview process and keep in mind that most of the time I was like, it's not going to work out. They're going to see through me, right? I have no experience whatsoever, but again, very blessed that they accepted me and moved into a role over the summer. And really what I was doing, I was working with a strategy and growth development team. And what that means is I was with the internal consultants. So I was able to kind of leverage that year of consulting experience plus my experience as an operations manager in a sense, right? And I was able to use that experience to get this role over the summer.
And make that happen, right? JP Morgan Chase, that was probably an excellent experience. You think about the journey that you've had while you're in the program. I wonder about if you could list maybe 2 or 3 points of evolution that you felt like you've had over our virtual year, now our year on ground, the summer internship, and then, as soon you'll be graduating and we'll be going off to become best for the world leaders, right? So tell me about any type of evolution you felt like you've grown over the last couple of years while in the MBA program.
Well, one of the main things is, I think it's continuing to evolve is, like I told you before, in groups, something's I don't do as well. And we had a conversation before of sort of where that stems from. And specifically, public speaking roles, something just comes over me, and perhaps past trauma or whatever it might be, but that's something that always kind of scared me, right?
Yeah, public speaking. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because...
Before you continue, because those are 2 different things, right? Working with groups and then public speaking. So those are 2 areas where you felt like you really weren't strength for you, huh?
And so that's the interesting part. In a role as a manager, I feel super confident. I can have a meeting with people because I know where I stand. I know where my authority is. But now you put me in a sea of where we're all equals, and I have a hard time kind of discerning or trying to understand kind of where I fit. And that gives me maybe a sort of anxiety, right? And so in these group situations, specifically now, like if I have to speak in front of a crowd, I'm not sure kind of where I stand. And maybe that gives me a little anxiety. Maybe I feel like, again, does it come through that people are going to see right through me? A fraud, right? And so...
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's a couple things to unpack there that I'm going to dive in. If you don't mind, it might be a little psychology, even though I'm not a psychologist. So they're saying one time that Colin Powell, right? General Powell, one of my favorite books, My American Journey, a good friend of mine bought me a signed copy of it just recently. Jay, our colleague. And one of his leadership lessons is don't tie your ego to a position, because if the position goes out the window, your ego will go out the window too, right? Mm-hmm. And what you just said was, I'm way more comfortable if I'm a manager because I know where my authority stems from, right? As opposed to, I am Ignacio and my authority is me. This is who I am, which is interesting. And then public speaking, which I never understood until we down and talked. And I'm going to ask you about that story if you don't mind sharing it, until we sat down and talked to understand, like, why is this guy who has this deep voice and presents very well afraid to stand up in front of people and talk? And I thought it was pretty interesting. It stems from your educational experience as a youth. Give us a little bit of background on that, because I think it's an interesting story when you talk about coming into an MBA program, identifying where you feel like you have weaknesses, and then working on those while you were here.
Yeah, sure. I think in elementary school, so, I was one of those kids that just did well in school, right? Like naturally did well in school. When I was in 5th grade, looking back, and this took a few years for me to kind of realize it after I saw like a counselor about it, but in 5th grade, I had an experience where I was that kid that was always eager to kind of raise my hand, participate. And then I had a teacher who essentially, I said something wrong. I gave the wrong answer. And then this teacher said, he said something prejudiced, right? I don't know if he wanted to go into details about what he said, but...
if it wasn't a curse word, he said it to you. This is a teacher talking. If you're comfortable saying it, say it.
Yeah. So I raised my hand, I got the answer wrong, and I still remember vividly, he kind of clenched the seat, and then he said, these damn Mexicans, right? And I didn't realize at the time what it meant, right? I never told my family, ever. And so, but I did notice so. And when I noticed it was when I got to UCLA, right? I got to UCLA and I had a professor say, hey, I need you to participate more. And I'm going to start calling you a little more. And I said, I guess I don't really participate. So I started seeing a counselor about it. We went back, started diving into it. And I realized, oh, wow.
That's where it stems.
Wow. I noticed that after that incident, I wasn't the kid that was raising my hand anymore. Wow. Because now I'm scared. And at the time also, there's always been a stigma and a stereotype of like maybe some Latinx people don't do as well in school. And I guess in a sense, I internalized that maybe I was supposed to represent, this group of people who were overcoming things, and now I wasn't. And so, I got to college, and here I am. I mean, I still remember getting like my first, I say bad grade in one of my essays, which is like a B- or so. And I felt like a fraud. I was like, wow, it's true. It's all true.
Isn't for me.
Everything was true. Like, oh man. And so I think that had just a profound impact. And I think maybe it gives me a little bit of, it traumatized me a little bit in the classroom setting specifically.
Maybe. Sounds like it did.
Yeah. And so, definitely speaking in groups, giving presentations, that's been a challenge. But one thing that I did do during my first year, I joined Toastmasters because I knew that in my internship, I had to deliver presentations, right? So I said, I'm not going to show up to internship and be this guy that crumbles in front of everyone.
Yeah, right.
So actually for the whole year, I actually did Toastmasters and it helped. But here's the thing. When I got to the internship, again, I felt comfortable, right? All of a sudden, like everything was fine. I had to deliver like a presentation at the end of the internship and I felt great. Like I felt confident, right? So
Toastmasters was virtual. Was Toastmasters virtual?
Toastmasters was in person.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, it was in person. It definitely helped me out. And I think there has been a sort of evolution now where if I get up in class, I still get those jitters in the beginning. But I think once I start talking, it feels good. It kind of reminds me of when I used to box and getting into the ring. I always had those jitters. I mean, my stomach would hurt. But that first punch I would get and like it would wake me up, right? It's almost like, oh yeah, it's just here's another person, right? Like we're two, like it's our instinct, nothing matters, no social roles. We're just going at it. And it's like, it's not a metaphor for combat. It is combat, right? And so, I don't know, it would kind of wake me up and that's kind of how I take it now.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? Opening kickoff, right? All the jitters gone. I guess it'd probably take you a couple sentences in your presentation before you've calmed that down. There are people who are performers on stage or who give lectures. I would almost say that even President Obama probably had jitters sometimes going up. Like that's a natural thing for people to have. But to be able to be introspective enough and to go get counseling to uncover the layers to figure out where this comes from, at that point, you could either decide to let it overcome you, or you can work through the progress of like you have been and are and probably will continue to be, of saying, okay, I know this is a struggle of mine, but I know where it comes from, so let me try to attack it and go be the leader that I am meant to be. I think that's an excellent story. Well, I think the excellent part of that story is that you are overcoming and will continue to overcome that. What I don't like about it is that, teachers, like you said, right? Black and brown kids, especially black and brown boys, right, are expected to overachieve. And one little inflection point in their life, a lot of times for us, will send us to a special ed program. And now we are categorized for the rest of our life, or get us lost in the system because of an overzealous police officer. Now we're lost in the system. Now our whole life has changed. The influence of teachers. My mother was a teacher, sister was a teacher, uncle was a teacher. I got so many teachers in my family. They don't get paid enough, but their influence is tremendous. And for him to say something like that is like, you stopped his trajectory for a second. He's still successful, but you could have ruined his life. You could have took that and just not want to engage in academics at all from that point. You see what I mean? How right. Crazy that is, the influence of people in the position of teachers. So that's pretty disappointing. I'm a little off. I would have went back to the school and said, hey man, I just want to talk to you, the teacher, because people who do that sometimes don't even remember that they did that and don't know the effect it had. And I probably would have talked to them, but that wouldn't have done anything other than cause the teacher trauma. But I think it's excellent that you found where you have. Let's dive into that boxing a little bit. I didn't know you were a boxer. When was that?
I was a teenager. I started when I was 15, stopped when I was 20 because I broke my hand, had to get surgery, and that was the end of that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
What exactly did you get from Toastmasters? Like, what did that really do for you in terms of learning how to speak publicly?
It gave me reps. Really, that's all it was, right? It gave me like opportunities to practice, get in front of people, and really kind of feel the jitters, right? Step into them and understand that, hey, it's fine. I could overcome it. Eventually, it'll settle in, and give me the opportunity to. There's a certain moment where I feel like, okay, I'm conscious of these jitters right now. Relax, take a deep breath, move forward. And so that was the main takeaway too, Toastmasters. And there's a few like exercises you do each meeting where they call on you and you have to stand up and you have to like speak off the cuff, right? They give you a topic, 2 minutes, go, right? So those were especially helpful for me because, I'm not prepared. It's not like I had a prepared speech or anything else like that. Those are easier. But now you ask me to get up in front of everyone and speak off the cuff about something incoherently too. So that could be troublesome when, you're trying to deal with the emotions and everything else going on. So I felt that the repetitions really helped out a lot.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen since we've been on ground, whatever classes or whatever things we took when we were virtual, Yes, I see someone who doesn't have a problem presenting himself confidently, right? You present yourself as Ignacio Rodriguez, the brand, not Ignacio Rodriguez who has a full-time job or who has this and has that. Ignacio Rodriguez himself as the brand, and I appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
Let's wrap here. Talk about JP Morgan Chase. They offered you a full-time job. It is still on the table. Tell me about your thoughts. What exactly is the full-time job that they offer? What are you doing with that whole situation?
Yeah, sure. So this full-time offer, it is a leadership development program, one of those rotation programs. So it's a 2-year program. Every 8 months, they move you into a different line of business, a different function, so forth. And it is based in Chicago. So very exciting. I think it's a great opportunity, and to be quite honest with you, about a couple months ago, we were very excited. My wife and I were very excited to move out there and kind of start like a little adventure and maybe move back eventually. But
I hear hesitation.
Huh?
I said, I hear hesitation.
Yeah. Just because, about a month and a half ago, we found out that we're having a baby.
Oh,
so
congratulations.
Huge blessing, absolutely. But of course, that kind of, there's a lot of questions about, is this the best choice, right? And I understand it's a great opportunity professionally, but my priority is always going to be God first, family second, and then professionally, that comes afterwards. So that's what I have to think about now. So there's some questions now, yeah.
The questions you got to answer yourself. But as you mentioned, right, as we said, your experiences help you establish your values and your priorities. And then from that point, every decision you make is based on those values and priorities, not necessarily the experiences you had, right? God first, family, and then profession. That's what makes the brand of Ignacio Rodriguez, right? This has been an excellent conversation. I hope for the best, man. Congratulations on the pregnancy. It's too bad we don't have any, we don't have finality on knowing what the job thing is going to be in terms of JP Morgan Chase, but I think it's excellent that you have the offer on the table. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Business of Creativity podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Ty. It's been great. It's been really cool hanging out with you.
That was Ignacio Rodriguez. He is a second-year full-time MBA here at the Grazia Dio Business School. And of course, this is Ty Brown, also second-year full-time MBA here at Grazia Dio. And this is the Business of Creativity podcast, the unofficial podcast of the Grazia Dio Business School at Pepperdine. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.